In an age when corruption was currency and compromise was expected, Grover Cleveland chose something radical: honesty. He did not charm the crowds, flatter political machines, or trade favors for power. Instead, he governed by a single, unforgiving question: is it right? That question would earn him enemies, derail ambitions, and ultimately crown him as one of the most morally resolute leaders in American history, remembered ever since as the Honest President. The Honest President, the life and legacy of Grover Cleveland, explores the rise of a man who proved that integrity, though unfashionable, could still triumph in the brutal arena of 19th century American politics. Cleveland's story is not one of privilege or destiny, but of discipline forged through hardship, responsibility assumed early, and principles tested relentlessly in public view. Born in 1837 in Caldwell, New Jersey, Stephen Grover Cleveland began life far from the corridors of power. Orphaned, young, and burdened with responsibility, he learned early that survival demanded self-reliance and unyielding effort. These formative years did more than shape his character, they hardened it. From them emerged a man who neither sought excuses nor tolerated corruption in himself or others. Cleveland's ascent through the political life of Buffalo, New York, from sheriff to mayor, governor, and eventually president, reads as a sustained campaign against dishonesty. At every level of office, he wielded the veto not as a political weapon, but as a moral instrument. Each decision, popular or not, was measured against duty to the public rather than allegiance to party or power brokers. Applause mattered little. Conscience mattered everything. As America entered the turbulent final decades of the 19th century, beset by patronage scandals, economic instability, and political cynicism, Cleveland stood apart. He was neither flamboyant nor demagogic. His appeal lay in something rarer: credibility. In a system accustomed to excess, his restraint was revolutionary. Structured into 8 penetrating chapters, this volume traces Cleveland's life from obscurity to the presidency, examining the choices that defined him and the costs of refusing to bend. By confronting both his successes and his controversies, this book reveals the enduring challenge of ethical leadership and the quiet power of character in public life. In an era still searching for honest leadership, Grover Cleveland's legacy endures not as a relic of the past, but as a standard against which every generation must measure itself. Chapter 1: A boy from New Jersey. Humble beginnings. In the small, unassuming township of Caldwell, New Jersey, the promise of the American dream found modest expression in the life of Stephen Grover Cleveland. Born on March 18, 1837, to Richard Fally Cleveland and Anneal Cleveland, young Grover entered a world far removed from the grandeur and pomp of political power. His father, a Presbyterian minister, and his mother, a homemaker of Welsh descent, provided the moral framework and loving guidance that would serve as the foundation upon which his character was built. The Cleveland household was neither wealthy nor well-connected. Their life revolved around faith, hard work, and a commitment to duty, values that were regularly imparted through both word and example. The family lived simply, with Richard Cleveland's modest salary stretched to meet the needs of 9 children. In this environment, the seeds of humility, self-reliance, and thrift were sown early. Grover's early education took place both at home and in the small schoolhouses of New Jersey and, later, upstate New York. As the Cleveland family moved according to Richard's pastoral appointments, Grover absorbed the disciplined rhythms of rural life. Lessons were punctuated by household chores and communal responsibilities, intertwining the development of mind and character. While formal academics were sometimes interrupted by moves or the family's fluctuating means, Grover's appetite for learning was insatiable. His father's teachings were frank and uncompromising. Not only was young Grover expected to recite Scripture and the Westminster Catechism, but he was also frequently reminded of the virtue of honesty and the significance of one's word. A man, Richard Cleveland would often say, is only as good as his integrity. Such lessons, embedded deeply in Grover's consciousness, would become the moral compass that guided him through the tumultuous terrain of American politics. The persistent economic hardship endured by the Cleveland family was both a humbling and formative experience. Unlike many of his future contemporaries, Grover's path was not eased by privilege. To help make ends meet, Grover engaged in small tasks and odd jobs, offering assistance wherever it was needed, whether as a helper, in church functions, or as an errand boy in the neighborhoods his family called home. These early encounters with the daily struggles of ordinary people would later inform his empathetic approach as a public servant. Grover's exposure to the world beyond his immediate community came in gradual, measured steps. His mother, Anne, was a quiet yet resolute figure, encouraging her son's curiosity and drive. She nurtured his intellect, reading aloud to him and ensuring that, even within the constraints of poverty, the joys of literature and knowledge were never far from reach. Under her care, Grover developed not only a respect for learning, but also a capacity for deep thought and reflection. Yet, the stability of his childhood was soon tested by a series of misfortunes. Frequent relocations, commanded by pastoral callings, meant that Grover rarely enjoyed the luxury of roots. Each new home presented a fresh set of challenges, from unfamiliar neighborhoods to the necessity of forging new friendships. Adversity, however, would become a reliable instructor, teaching the young Cleveland to embrace adaptability, resilience, and a quiet fortitude. The passing years in New Jersey and eventually in upstate New York mapped a steady progression from boyhood innocence to the first stirrings of adult responsibility. By his early teens, Grover was already recognized by friends and family for his mature sense of duty and an innate seriousness that belied his years. The untimely death of his father, when Grover was only 16, would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Suddenly thrust into the role of provider, he put aside youthful dreams and prepared to meet the demands of manhood well before his time. This chapter, therefore, is not merely an account of Cleveland's early years, but an examination of the crucible in which his character was formed. In the small towns of New Jersey, through hardship and faith, discipline and love, a humble boy was quietly preparing for a future that neither he nor his family could then envision. His journey from these beginnings holds the key to understanding the man honest, unyielding, and principled who would one day become President of the United States. Chapter 2, Loss and Responsibility, growing up to soon dot in the stark winter landscape of 1853. Tragedy descended upon the Cleveland family with an unyielding chill. Richard Falley Cleveland, Grover's father and the household's spiritual and practical guide, was lost to illness, leaving behind a widow and a large family on the cusp of destitution. At 16, Grover Cleveland was confronted by a reality that few boys his age are prepared to meet: the abrupt dissolution of stability, security, and the innocence of youth. The aftermath of Richard Cleveland's passing inflicted not only sorrow, but also an acute sense of responsibility upon Grover. With 8 siblings and a grieving mother, the mantle of provider fell upon his shoulders. Dreams of collegiate education once entertained by both Grover and his parents evaporated in the fog of necessity. Instead, the immediate imperatives of survival and support demanded their due. Sacrifice, not ambition, would chart Cleveland's course for the coming years. Grover's resolve, shaped by his upbringing, enabled him to meet his new role with determination. He set aside any remaining traces of childhood, exchanging school books for employment. His first substantial job was as an assistant in the New York Institute for the Blind. Arranged through the intercession of a family friend, the work was arduous, consisting of administrative tasks interspersed with direct assistance to the institution's residents. The meager income provided a lifeline for the Clevelands, but also offered Grover a glimpse into the burdens and quiet dignity of service. In these years, Cleveland's responsibilities far exceeded those of a boy his age. He managed household finances, coordinated with his siblings, and stood as the principal source of strength for his mother. And yet, he bore these burdens not as a martyr, but with a resolute acceptance born of his father's stoic example. The trials of these adolescent years imbued Cleveland with an uncommon maturity and a scrupulous sense of duty that impressed all who knew him. Financial hardship forced Cleveland to continually adjust the trajectory of his ambitions. While his academic pursuits were temporarily sidelined, he remained a voracious reader, finding time in the early mornings or late at night to devour books of history, philosophy, and law. He corresponded with family friends and mentors, seeking guidance not only for the material well-being of his family, but for his personal growth as well. His experience at the Institute for the Blind, especially, awoke in him a sense of empathy and purpose, a conviction that public service, in whatever form, could dignify both life and labor. Several years of these steady, unheralded efforts yielded little but cumulative progress. The Cleveland family never knew luxury, but through industry and the prudent management of scant resources, they endured. Perhaps more significantly, Grover's exposure to hardship made him intensely aware of society's injustices and the responsibilities that ought rightly accompany any position of influence. It was during this time that the rudiments of his future political philosophy, emphasizing self-reliance, duty, and the primacy of ethical conduct, took root. By his early 20s, the burdens of family were lessened as his siblings attained greater independence. For the first time since his father's death, Cleveland could contemplate a future not dictated entirely by necessity. He recognized, with characteristic modesty, that any advancement would be hard-won. In 1855, at age 18, he set off for Buffalo, New York, seeking broader horizons and a chance to forge his own destiny. The transition to Buffalo marked not only a physical journey, but the dawn of a new chapter in self-making. He found work as a clerk in a law firm, initially performing menial duties, but always watching, learning, and striving. The office, bustling and occasionally chaotic, became his real classroom. He mastered legal principles through diligence and unwavering attention to detail qualities that made him stand out even as a novice. Despite long hours and limited formal education, Cleveland's seriousness and rectitude brought him the favor of his employers. By night, he pored over law books. By day, he demonstrated abilities and judgment far beyond his years. The resilience shaped in the years following his father's death, when hope was tested and sacrifice was demanded, was now the bedrock of his emerging identity. He was learning with each choice and each challenge not only how to survive, but how to lead. The young man who had been forced to grow up too soon carried into adulthood a unique legacy, a fusion of humility, work ethic, and moral clarity. These experiences, though born of loss, became the underpinning of the public figure Grover Cleveland would become. When asked later in life about his unshakable sense of responsibility, he would often speak of those early years and the lessons learned in the crucible of necessity. Thus, the shadow of loss that loomed over Grover Cleveland's youth proved also to be his shaping fire. In confronting hardship, accepting responsibility, and refusing to submit either to despair or to self-pity, he laid the groundwork for a life of service. The next stage of his story would see these hard-won virtues tested and affirmed in the arenas of law, reform, and ultimately, public office. Chapter 3, Self-Made Man, Law, Discipline, and Integrity. Buffalo, New York in the 1850s was a city in the throes of transformation. Its streets, teeming with energy, commerce, and ambition, offered both opportunities and hazards to a young man hungry for advancement. Into this city arrived Grover Cleveland, armed with little more than determination, a keen mind, and the lessons forged in adversity. The quest to become a lawyer and thereby a self-made man was to be the defining enterprise of his early adulthood. At first, Cleveland's prospects seemed modest. He began his tenure at the Buffalo law firm of Rogers, Bowen and Rogers as a humble clerk, undertaking a litany of menial tasks that fell well below the grandeur of legal advocacy. Yet, his willingness to learn, coupled with his exceptional sense of responsibility, set him apart. Instead of grumbling at drudgery, Cleveland approached every task, however minor, with meticulous care. He managed case files, made deliveries, and attended to the needs of his employers, always with an air of quiet diligence that did not go unnoticed. The discipline that had been forced upon him by family tragedy now found a new purpose. Every evening, after others had departed, Cleveland could be found poring over legal treatises and case law, deciphering the intricacies of the American judicial system. He read not only out of necessity, but also with an intellectual curiosity that distinguished him from mere functionaries. Law, he soon realized, was more than a profession. It was a means of administering justice, of giving structure and meaning to the chaos of society. Mentors at the firm recognized his potential and began to assign more complex responsibilities. Cleveland's unassuming demeanor belied a formidable intelligence and an ability to synthesize large quantities of information. He cultivated a reputation for absolute trustworthiness. Other clerks might cut corners or gossip. Cleveland worked steadfastly, trusted with sensitive documents and confidences. In 1859, after years of grueling self-study and apprenticeship, Cleveland passed the bar examination and was admitted to the New York State Bar. The achievement was not simply professional, it was a personal vindication, the reward for years of perseverance and sacrifice. No inherited title or family fortune marked his entrance into the legal world. He was a self-made man, every success the product of effort and ethical conduct. As a young attorney, Cleveland refused the shortcuts and dubious practices that were commonplace at the time. He represented clients honestly, never exploiting technicalities for personal gain. When faced with cases that challenged his conscience, he opted for the morally sound course, even if it meant forgoing potential profit. His clients, recognizing this integrity, soon brought him consistent business. He became known not for flamboyant court performances, but for sound advice and untarnished professionalism. Cleveland's personal discipline extended into all aspects of his life. He rose early, seldom indulged in idle pursuits, and lived well within his means. Unlike many of his peers who sought the path of least resistance or the temporary favor of influential sponsors, Cleveland advanced gradually, allowing merit and trustworthiness to speak for themselves. The habits of thrift, hard work, and honesty remained constant companions. Over time, Cleveland's standing in Buffalo's legal community grew. This recognition, however, did not alter his essential modesty. He was affiliated with local charities, provided free legal counsel to those unable to pay, and participated in civic organizations committed to social improvement. Through these activities, Cleveland developed an increasingly acute understanding of the challenges facing ordinary people, insights that would one day inform his approach to both municipal reform and national leadership. The self-made man that emerged in Buffalo was, in every way, a product of discipline and character. Life had given Grover Cleveland few advantages, but from this, he drew an inexhaustible wellspring of resolve and perspective. For him, success was not measured by wealth or status, but by the fidelity with which one upheld principle in the service of the greater good. As the 1860s advanced and the specter of national conflict loomed in the distance, Cleveland's dedication to law and justice became his calling card. He continued to forgo personal gain for public duty, a posture that would soon propel him from the quiet chambers of legal practice to the noisy arena of public office. In law, Cleveland had found both his profession and his preparation for a higher purpose, where discipline and integrity would be the tools by which he fought for reform. Chapter 4: Buffalo Reformer, Fighting Corruption at Home. The aftermath of the American Civil War left many cities, including Buffalo, grappling with economic challenges, demographic change, and a rise in political corruption. Graft, patronage, and municipal inefficiency became the norm as unscrupulous officials lined their pockets at the expense of public trust. It was into this contentious arena that Grover Cleveland, unassuming lawyer and rising public servant, would step, a figure uniquely equipped by training, temperament, and conviction to champion the cause of reform. Cleveland's first substantive foray into public life came with his appointment as Assistant District Attorney of Erie County in 1863. Here, he quickly earned a reputation for prosecuting offenders with equal parts vigor and fairness. Impartiality became his watchword. He refused to bend the law for friends or political allies, applying the same standards to all, irrespective of wealth or influence. His commitment to principle did not endear him to the entrenched interests that dominated Buffalo's political landscape. Frequent clashes with party bosses and well-connected attorneys marked his tenure. Yet Cleveland remained unbowed. On more than one occasion, he prosecuted cases that threatened to derail his own career prospects, choosing to stand by what he believed to be right rather than take the expedient path. Cleveland's next public role as sheriff of Erie County further cemented his reputation as a reformer. Elected in 1870, he assumed an office rife with both opportunity and temptation. The position of sheriff, often associated with the abuses of fee-grabbing and cronyism, held a unique place in the machinery of local graft. Cleveland made it his mission to correct these abuses, implementing reforms that made the office efficient, transparent, and above all, honest. Perhaps most emblematic of his moral resolve was his handling of executions. In an era where sheriffs often paid deputies to perform the grisly duty, Cleveland refused to delegate responsibility, believing it wrong to shift the moral burden onto another. Personally overseeing the execution process, he insisted on humane conduct and fair procedures, a testament to his mixture of stoic discipline and unsentimental compassion. For these and other efforts, Cleveland's standing among the people of Buffalo grew. He became known as someone who could not be bought, a public servant immune to both intimidation and supplication. Civic organizations, reformers, and ordinary citizens alike looked to him as an exemplar of ethical government. Yet reform came with a price. Cleveland's refusal to play political games meant that he often faced isolation within his own party. His principled stance sometimes cost him the support needed for advancement, and his unwavering commitment to integrity left him at odds with ambitious colleagues. Still, he pressed on, motivated by the conviction that public office was a public trust. The challenges of Buffalo were microcosms of broader national dilemmas: corruption, complacency, and a growing chasm between the governed and their representatives. For Grover Cleveland, however, reform was not an abstract cause but a concrete duty, the ultimate test of one's character. In this crucible of local politics, Cleveland's vision of honest government was both articulated and demonstrated, leaving a legacy that would soon propel him beyond Buffalo's borders and onto the larger stage of state and national reform. Chapter 5: The Veto Mayor. Power used with principle. Cleveland's election as mayor of Buffalo in 1881 marked a pivotal moment, both in his career and in the trajectory of reform politics in America. Known already as a fierce opponent of corruption, Cleveland approached the mayoralty with clear-eyed purpose to root out waste, safeguard the public purse, and ensure that the city served its citizens rather than political machines. Almost from the outset, Cleveland's administration was defined by a single, powerful instrument, the veto. Within his first few months in office, he used this power with unprecedented frequency, blocking legislation he found wasteful, self-serving, or inimical to the common good. Each veto message was an exercise in candor, meticulously documenting his objections and laying out the moral and civic grounds for his opposition. Perhaps most famously, Cleveland vetoed a measure that would have awarded inflated contracts for street cleaning, a move that incited the wrath of contractors and party bosses. Undeterred, he made his case directly to the people. A public office, he declared in one of the earliest speeches of his mayoralty, is a public trust. This simple pronouncement, almost revolutionary in its time, resonated far beyond Buffalo's boundaries. Cleveland's actions did not merely save the city money. They also reawakened public confidence in municipal government. Residents accustomed to cynicism and inertia now saw in their mayor a leader whose motives were transparent and whose allegiance was to principle, not profit or partisanship. City Hall, once a den of intrigue, became a workplace where discipline and honesty ruled. The costs of such a stance, however, were real. Party leaders, seeing Cleveland as a threat to their influence, attempted to marginalize him. He was denounced as inflexible, even self-righteous. Yet, Cleveland patiently explained that effective leadership was not about appeasement, but about fidelity to the public good. Cleveland's term as mayor was brief, barely 1 year, but its impact proved seismic. His use of the veto became a model for reform-minded officials elsewhere in the state and country, and his reputation for honesty attracted the attention of state Democrats and independent reformers. The lessons of Buffalo, the necessity of clear principle, steady resolve, and the willingness to say no to the powerful would form the backbone of his subsequent career as governor of New York and ultimately as president. The veto mayor left office having fundamentally altered the relationship between elected officials and their constituents. In doing so, Cleveland laid out a vision of public service whose echoes would be heard for generations to come. Leadership as stewardship, grounded always in honesty and the relentless pursuit of the common good. Chapter 6, Governor with a Backbone. Reform in New York. Grover Cleveland's journey to national prominence began not in the halls of Congress or amidst sweeping national debates, but in the gritty reality of municipal and state politics. His tenure as governor of New York stands as a testament to his resolve, the commitment to reform, a steadfast refusal to compromise his principles in the face of formidable opposition. When Cleveland assumed the governorship in 1883, the state of New York was mired in an era of political patronage and entrenched corruption. The Democratic Party, like its Republican counterpart, was beholden to powerful interests whose influence extended into every facet of government. The spoils system was rampant. Political appointments and contracts were dispensed as rewards to loyal operatives, rather than on merit. Cleveland, whose rise was marked by an unblemished record of honesty, brought to Albany a new ethos, a belief that government served the people, not the party, nor private interests. He famously declared, "A public office is a public trust." This guiding principle would shape both his approach and the controversies that defined his governorship. One of Cleveland's earliest and most consequential acts as governor was his confrontation with the state's patronage system. He began with a wholesale review of state contracts, appointments, and expenditures. Waste, inefficiency, and outright fraud were rooted out with unwavering determination. Cleveland's veto pen became a symbol of his office. He wielded it against legislative measures that smacked of excess or favored special interests. His stance on civil service reform was particularly notable, where previous governors had acquiesced to pressure from party leaders. Cleveland advocated for merit-based appointments, an idea then radical, even incendiary. He signed the New York State Civil Service Reform Act in 1883, moving the state toward competitive examinations for public employment. This act, inspired in part by the completion of federal civil service reform under President Chester A. Arthur, reinforced Cleveland's reputation as a champion of clean government. Predictably, these reforms incited anger and opposition. Party bosses found themselves sidelined, their power diminished. The legislature bristled at Cleveland's vetoes and refusals to rubber-stamp political appointments. Yet, the public admired his courage. Newspapers chronicled his battles with Tammany Hall and other corrupt organizations, painting him as a bulwark against the tide of graft. Cleveland's fiscal policies further exemplified his commitment to responsible governance. He rigorously scrutinized state budgets, pushing back against proposals he considered unnecessary or extravagant. His reluctance to spend public money without cause endeared him to tax-paying citizens, though it alienated those more accustomed to largesse. Under his watch, state expenditures fell as efficiency improved, a result of both his vigilance and his insistence on accountability. Throughout his governorship, Cleveland maintained an accessible demeanor. He held regular open-door meetings, invited comment from constituents, and ensured that state officials were responsive to the needs of the public. Unlike many of his predecessors, Cleveland was viewed as approachable, honest, and unfailingly candid. This transparency deepened public trust, paving the way for his later ascension. Yet, Cleveland's time in Albany was not without setbacks. Reform met resistance, and compromises were sometimes necessary to ensure progress. Critics charged that his approach was too confrontational, risking legislative gridlock. Still, Cleveland rarely wavered, his resolve underscored by a belief that even incremental change toward integrity was preferable to acquiescence. The legacy of Cleveland's governorship extends beyond the reforms he enacted. It was a model of leadership grounded in character, not charisma or calculation. In standing against corruption, he redefined what was possible in public office, inspiring reformers across the nation and drawing the attention of national party leaders. Seeking a new direction, indeed, Cleveland's successes in New York set the stage for his nomination for the presidency. As the Democratic Party searched for a candidate who could reclaim its credibility, Cleveland's reputation for honesty and efficiency made him an obvious choice. His record was not simply one of accomplishments, but of principled resistance to the temptations and pressures of power. In reflecting on his governorship, Cleveland once noted that it was his duty to protect the interests of the people rather than those of the politicians. This ethic remained at the heart of his later presidency and endures as a benchmark for all those who follow in public service. New York's reformer had, in a brief but impactful tenure, proven that a backbone of integrity could reshape even the most entrenched systems, a lesson as vital today as it was more than a century ago. Chapter 7: The Unlikely Nominee, A Democrat's Rise. Grover Cleveland's emergence as the Democratic nominee for the presidency was meteoric, unexpected, and emblematic of a shifting political landscape. His path contrasted sharply with those of seasoned politicians, whose nomination battles were often fought behind closed doors and influenced by party machinery. Cleveland was propelled into the national spotlight by an unyielding reputation for honesty and reform, rarity in a time rife with scandal and patronage. The roots of Cleveland's nomination trace back to his transformative governorship in New York, which had earned him recognition as a leader of principle. Amidst national disillusionment with politics, the Democratic Party faced an urgent need for renewal. The 1880 political climate was fraught. Republicans, whose grip on the presidency had endured through the aftermath of the Civil War and Reconstruction, were vulnerable after repeated corruption scandals. The Democrats, looking to break their long-standing exile, yearned for a candidate untainted by these associations. Cleveland's appeal lay in his distance from traditional party politics. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he had not been groomed for national leadership nor participated in intricate political plotting. His political ascent was a consequence of public sentiment, not party orchestration. This made him both attractive and unpredictable to party leaders who sought to restore credibility. The New York Democratic Convention in 1884 was a turning point. Cleveland's nomination for governor had already demonstrated that the public clamored for honest leadership. His decisive victory in the state had galvanized reform-minded Democrats and fortified his standing with independents and Republicans tired of corruption. As whispers of his presidential potential grew, the National Party began to pay heed. Party bosses, including Samuel J. Tilden, himself a reformer and previous presidential nominee, saw in Cleveland a candidate who could bridge the gap between reformers and traditionalists. The press began to champion Cleveland as the candidate who could win, and his name gained traction among rank-and-file party members. His record of vetoes and civil service reform inflamed enthusiasm in urban centers, while his fiscal conservatism reassured rural constituencies. The 1880 Democratic National Convention in Chicago was dramatic. Cleveland's candidacy faced resistance from factions loyal to other leading Democrats, including Thomas A. Hendricks and Benjamin Butler. Nevertheless, Cleveland's support grew rapidly, buoyed by the endorsement of influential newspapers and reform advocates. On the second ballot, Cleveland emerged triumphant, his nomination an emphatic rejection of the old order. Cleveland's selection was historical in its own right. He was only 2 years removed from winning the governorship and was largely unknown beyond the Northeast. Yet, his reputation for honesty and independence cast a long shadow. The party's gamble was clear. They sought not merely victory, but redemption. Cleveland represented a radical departure from politics, as usual a challenge to the entrenched interests who had long dominated the party. The Republican response was swift and pointed, addressing Cleveland's lack of experience. Opponents questioned his readiness for national leadership. The campaign quickly descended into personal attacks. Cleveland's challengers brought forth allegations that tested the boundaries of privacy and propriety. The infamous revelation of an illegitimate child became fodder. for Republican propaganda test not only of Cleveland's character, but of the public's appetite for reform throughout the nomination process. Cleveland demonstrated a remarkable resilience. He refused to counterattack with equally venomous rhetoric. Instead, he confessed to his past missteps, trusting the public to judge his honesty. This candor was unprecedented, and it struck a chord. Voters were accustomed to evasions, denials, and the obfuscation of personal failings. By confronting controversy directly, Cleveland set a new standard for political accountability. Cleveland's independence was also evident in his approach to party politics. He refused to make secret deals or promise patronage appointments in exchange for support. This earned him respect and suspicion from both reformers and party regulars. He insisted on choosing his own vice presidential candidate, resulting in the selection of Thomas A. Hendricks, himself an advocate for reform. As the campaign began, Cleveland's prospects seemed both promising and precarious. The Democrats, battered by years of defeat, faced a formidable Republican machine. Yet Cleveland offered a vision that transcended party lines. He promised honest government, fiscal restraint, and a commitment to the public interest. His nomination was a reflection of the country's desire for change, signaling a new era in American politics. Cleveland's rise was, in many respects, the story of a nation yearning for honesty and renewal. His status as an unlikely nominee was, in truth, emblematic of his times. America was ready to take a chance on authenticity. The party's bet would be vindicated, but the journey ahead would demand ever greater resolve from its new champion. Cleveland's story had become the narrative of a beleaguered democracy, poised to reclaim its integrity and hope. Chapter 8: A Campaign of Character. Honesty on Trial. The presidential campaign of 1884 was exceptional not only for the personalities it brought to the fore, but for the unprecedented focus on personal character. Grover Cleveland's candidacy was a challenge to the prevailing modes of political discourse, a contest where honesty, rather than policy, became the principal battleground. In this campaign, the notion that character counts was put to its severest test. Cleveland's opponent, James G. Blaine, was a seasoned Republican politician with vast experience and an expansive network. However, Blaine's tenure had been marred by allegations of corruption. The Mulligan letters and other controversies had eroded public trust. Recognizing these vulnerabilities, Democrats sought to contrast Cleveland's integrity with Blaine's checkered past. The campaign was unusually personal. Early in the race, Republican strategists discovered and publicized the story of Cleveland's alleged illegitimate child. The press seized upon the scandal, and the slogan "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" became a mocking refrain among Blaine's supporters. In response, Cleveland did not equivocate. He issued a statement acknowledging the situation and took responsibility, advising his supporters to face the issue forthrightly. This candor was extraordinary in a period when politicians frequently denied or concealed misconduct. Cleveland's response shaped the entire campaign. His willingness to admit personal failings and to place honesty above expediency altered the tenor of public debate. Newspapers, both supportive and oppositional, remarked upon the novelty. The New York Times noted, "A man who admits his faults is rare in politics. Rarer still is the candidate who asks the public to judge him on his honesty." Party leaders and the electorate responded in kind. Reform organizations, including the Mugwumps, a group of Republicans dissatisfied with their party's candidate, rallied to Cleveland's side. Their name, derived from an Algonquin word for important person, became synonymous with a national movement for reform. The Mugwumps' support was decisive. Their endorsement lent credibility to Cleveland, attracting independent voters and signaling the dawn of a new political era. The campaign's focus on character did not preclude discussion of substantive issues. Cleveland advocated for civil service reform, fiscal discipline, and a reduction of tariffs. His platform was plain but principled. In contrast, Blaine's campaign emphasized economic growth and protective tariffs, positioning itself as the defender of American industry. However, the shadow of corruption loomed over these debates, with Cleveland's honesty often trumping policy. As the pivotal concern, personal attacks were not confined to Cleveland. Democrats countered with allegations about Blaine's connections to railroad interests and his questionable dealings. Political cartoons and pamphlets flooded the press, depicting both candidates in exaggerated terms. Yet, Cleveland's admission of his own failings and refusal to retaliate with exaggerated claims set him apart. He refrained from incendiary rhetoric, relying instead on reasoned argument and a dignified bearing. Public response to Cleveland's campaign of character was mixed but ultimately supportive. Many Americans sympathized with his predicament and admired his forthrightness. In rural towns and urban centers alike, voters spoke of Cleveland as a candidate who mirrored their own struggles with adversity and imperfection. His honesty was seen as an antidote to decades of political chicanery. Election night was tense. The outcome hinged upon New York, a state where Cleveland's reputation as governor gave him an edge. In the end, Cleveland secured victory by a narrow margin, owing in large part to the unprecedented alliance of reformers and independents. "Ma, where's my pa?" was answered with the victorious refrain, "Gone to the White House." Ha. Cleveland's campaign remains a defining moment in American political history. It redefined the role of character in the electoral process, demonstrating that honesty, even when uncomfortable, could overcome partisan attacks and entrenched interests. The campaign also underscored the value of transparency and accountability, qualities that would later inform Cleveland's presidency. In retrospect, Cleveland's victory was as much a testament to the electorate's desire for authenticity as it was a rejection of corruption. The campaign of 1884 has reverberated through subsequent elections, offering enduring lessons about leadership, integrity, and the power of personal character. Cleveland's triumph set a precedent that neither party could ignore, a reminder that, for a democracy beset by challenges, honesty remains its greatest asset. Chapter 9. The first Cleveland presidency begins. The inauguration of Grover Cleveland marked an inflection point in the trajectory of American governance. As the 22nd president, Cleveland assumed office in March 1885 not only as the first Democrat in decades to reclaim the highest office, but as a leader whose mandate rested squarely on the foundation of honesty and reform. His presidency would prove both consequential and fraught with difficult choices. Upon entering the White House, Cleveland confronted a government still wedded to the spoils system. Political patronage was the norm. Public offices and contracts were dispensed as rewards for party loyalty, undermining efficiency and eroding public trust. Cleveland, true to his reputation as governor, immediately signaled his intention to disrupt this prevailing order. In his inaugural address, Cleveland reaffirmed his central principle: a public office is a public trust. He pledged to restore integrity and accountability, promising reforms that would extend the logic of his state-level successes to the national sphere. The president's first actions were deliberate and symbolic. Cleveland resisted pressure from business interests and party leaders to replace office holders with loyal Democrats. Instead, he directed his cabinet to retain competent officials regardless of their party affiliations, insisting that performance and honesty, not politics, would guide appointments. This stance invoked controversy. Many Democrats, having endured decades of Republican dominance, expected patronage as recompense for their loyalty. Cleveland's refusal to indulge disappointment sparked, but also underscored the seriousness of his reform agenda. He publicly explained his approach, arguing that the government owed fidelity to the people, not to party functionaries. Civil service reform was a centerpiece of Cleveland's early presidency. He expanded competitive examinations for federal employment and sought stricter enforcement of existing laws. Though the Pendleton Civil Service Act had been passed 2 years prior, its implementation had been uneven. Cleveland directed agencies to increase merit-based hiring and dismissed officials found guilty of corruption. Fiscal discipline was another hallmark of Cleveland's administration. He scrutinized federal expenditures, wielding the veto against bills he deemed unnecessary or extravagant. Cleveland's first year saw a record number of vetoes, particularly against private pension bills for Civil War veterans. He explained that while veterans deserved respect, the government owed a duty to prevent abuse and preserve fiscal integrity. Many attempts to grant special favors or widen eligibility for pensions were rebuffed, earning Cleveland criticism from some quarters but acclaim from others. Cleveland's independent leadership was further evident in his handling of Congress. He sought collaborative relationships, but refused to bow to legislative demands that conflicted with his principles. This autonomy isolated him politically, but solidified his reputation as a president who placed integrity above expediency. The social issues of the era also demanded Cleveland's attention. He approached the subject of race with caution, mindful of the fraught legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction. Cleveland's administration maintained a conservative stance on civil rights, emphasizing adherence to law rather than ambitious policy reform. Nonetheless, he attempted to protect the legitimacy of the federal government through moderate appointments and efforts to limit discrimination in public employment. Cleveland's presidency was not without challenges. His stance often brought him into conflict with powerful leaders both within his own party and among Republicans. The press, eager for controversy, chronicled these battle lines, sometimes portraying Cleveland as obstinate or overly rigid. Yet, Cleveland's persistence was apparent. He believed that the restoration of public trust was more vital than fleeting popularity. His first administration also witnessed significant economic debates. Tariff reform became a dominant issue, with Cleveland arguing that protective tariffs were creating excess revenue and benefiting favored industries at taxpayer expense. He advocated for lower tariffs, contending that government surplus invited waste and corruption. This case would occupy much of his presidency and lay the groundwork for future policy battles. Foreign policy under Cleveland was marked by restraint. He avoided entanglements in overseas affairs, believing that American interests were best served by attention at home. The president oversaw diplomatic disputes with Great Britain, particularly over fishing rights, and maintained a cautious approach to expansionism. Cleveland's personal habits reinforced his public image. He eschewed luxury, worked long hours, and maintained direct contact with his advisors, a business-like approach admired by many. His wife, Frances Folsom Cleveland, brought grace and charm to the White House, providing a counterpoint to his seriousness. By the end of his first year, Cleveland had established himself as a president of character, a leader who defied conventional politics in the service of principle. His administration, though catalyzing conflict, also reassured Americans that government could be both honest and effective. In sum, the first Cleveland presidency was a period of renewal, marked by reform, discipline, and the unwavering application of ethical standards. It was a time when the promise of honest leadership, so vital in the campaign, found real expression in policy and action. A legacy whose influence would linger far beyond his tenure in office. Chapter 10: Vetoes and Fiscal Discipline. A President Says No. Grover Cleveland's approach to the executive office was, above all, defined by a commitment to fiscal discipline and an unwavering tendency to say no when confronted with legislative excess. Unique among his contemporaries, he wielded the veto not merely as a constitutional prerogative, but as a bulwark against corruption, waste, and the creeping influence of special interests. This chapter dissects the philosophy, rationale, and consequences of Cleveland's fiscal conservatism through an exploration of both his methods and the myriad controversies it spawned. Upon his inauguration, Cleveland inherited a sprawling government steeped in the practices of patronage and reckless appropriations. The country, then emerging from the dislocations of Reconstruction and confronting new industrial realities, was plagued by calls for expansive public spending. Congressional bills routinely included appropriations for questionable projects, often labeled as pork barrel spending, solicited by legislators eager to curry favor with their constituents. Cleveland's response was resolute. He viewed the presidency as the people's guardian, not a facilitator of favors or largesse. During his first term, he issued over 414 vetoes, a number unparalleled at the time. Many of these were directed at private pension bills which, in his view, diluted the intention behind military pensions, transforming them from acts of public gratitude to vehicles for political reward. The president insisted that pensions should be restricted to those genuinely in need, not expanded as a political tool. One notable veto involved a bill for Civil War veterans. While sympathetic to those who had served, Cleveland was adamant that appropriations be carefully scrutinized. He stated, "I will not be party to the prostitution of the government's benevolence." This stance earned him the animosity of certain interest groups, particularly the powerful Grand Army of the Republic, who lambasted his indifference to veterans' needs. Yet, Cleveland's decisions reflected not callousness, but a conviction that public funds demanded careful stewardship. Cleveland's fiscal discipline extended beyond pension bills. He confronted proposals for subsidies to railroads and other enterprises, asserting that the government ought not serve as a financier for private projects, unless demonstrably beneficial to the public. His opposition to increasing the money supply, especially through the free coinage of silver, which many viewed as a remedy for economic stagnation, further illustrated his preference for sound money principles, even at the risk of angering agrarian and populist factions. The consequences of Cleveland's vetoes reverberated throughout the political landscape. Some decried his presidency as obstructionist, accusing him of impeding legislative progress. Others praised his principled restraint, viewing his actions as necessary checks on legislative enthusiasm. Cleveland was not averse to controversy, believing that his first responsibility was not to appease, but to uphold the public trust. By intertwining the veto power with fiscal discipline, Cleveland set a tone that shaped his entire administration. His presidency became a beacon for those who valued honesty and moderation, and a bane for those who demanded government largesse. In both philosophy and practice, Cleveland's dedication to principle over politics defined his legacy. As the honest president, one unafraid to say no, even when yes seemed politically expedient. Chapter 11, The Tariff Wars, Economic Policy and Conflict. The tariff debate during Grover Cleveland's presidency represents a microcosm of late 19th century American politics, marked by ideological schisms and economic upheaval. Cleveland's navigation of this contentious terrain exposes both the complexity of policy making and the challenges of reconciling competing interests within a rapidly transforming nation. Tariffs, imposed to shield domestic industries from foreign competition, had grown into a cornerstone of federal revenue. Especially in the years preceding Cleveland's rise, the protective tariffs benefited manufacturers in the North, whose growth depended on limiting imports, but burdened agricultural and rural constituencies, who faced higher prices for goods and retaliatory tariffs abroad. The resulting tension rippled across party lines, embedding itself deeply in the national dialogue. Cleveland, a Democrat beholden to a party historically skeptical of high tariffs, entered office determined to address what he saw as a fundamental economic distortion. He argued that tariffs had become a tax that people do not know they pay. His words underscored a belief that protectionism was an unjust transfer of wealth to privileged industries. In his annual messages to Congress, Cleveland pressed for reform, waging a rhetorical and legislative campaign against what he deemed anachronistic and excessive tariff structures. The battle intensified with the introduction of the Mills Bill, a legislative effort to lower tariff rates. Cleveland, though not directly involved in drafting the bill, lobbied vigorously for its passage, framing the issue as a struggle for economic fairness and transparency. His advocacy was met with resistance from industrialist Republicans, who argued that protection was vital for fostering domestic employment and maintaining America's competitive edge. The tariff issue became central to the 1888 presidential election. Republicans, sensing vulnerability, branded Cleveland as a threat to American labor and prosperity. The campaign devolved into vitriolic exchanges, with each side stoking fears of economic dislocation. Cleveland's defeat in that election was, in large part, attributed to his steadfastness on the tariff question, a testament to both his commitment and the political risks inherent in unpopular reform. Cleveland's return to office in 1893 offered a sequel to the tariff wars. He supported the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act, which sought modest reductions but ultimately fell short of his vision due to congressional compromises and amendments. Cleveland's disappointment was palpable. He considered the final bill a diluted version of true reform, emblematic of legislative gridlock and the difficulty of contesting entrenched interests. The tariff wars were more than a battle over numbers. They were contests over the direction of the American economy and the proper role of government. Cleveland's leadership demonstrated a willingness to confront powerful adversaries, even at personal and political cost. His insistence on reform reflected his broader philosophy. Policy must serve the broad public, not narrow interests. The enduring significance of Cleveland's tariff battles lies not only in their immediate outcomes, but also in their illumination of the democratic process. His struggle sent a clear message that honesty in government requires both transparency and courage. Tariff policy, like all policy, is best shaped by principle rather than expedience, a lesson Cleveland sought to impart, and one that continues to resonate in the ongoing debate over the nation's economic path. Chapter 12, Standing Alone, Battles with Party Leaders. Grover Cleveland's presidency was characterized by a remarkable degree of independence, a trait that often placed him at odds with his own party leaders and political machine. His insistence on standing alone, guided by conscience rather than party dictates, distinguished him as a president who valued integrity over compromise, even when it required him to confront powerful allies. The Democratic Party during Cleveland's era was a complex tapestry, stitched together from regional and economic interests that frequently clashed. Party leaders, particularly those entrenched in the urban machines of New York and elsewhere, wielded considerable influence, often expecting presidents to acquiesce to their demands. Cleveland's relationship with these figures was fraught from the outset. His nomination itself, as a reform-minded outsider, signaled resistance to their traditional control. Cleveland's campaign against patronage was perhaps his most significant challenge to party leadership. He viewed the spoils system, a practice wherein elected officials distributed government jobs to supporters, as a corrosive influence that undermined public trust. Upon taking office, Cleveland moved swiftly to professionalize the civil service, refusing to replace competent Republican appointees simply for party loyalty. This stance provoked outrage among Democratic stalwarts, who expected rewards for their electoral contributions. Battles over appointments unfolded on multiple fronts. Tammany Hall, the notorious New York City political machine, relentlessly lobbied Cleveland for patronage. The president countered their entreaties with terse refusal, prompting open opposition and, in some cases, sabotage. Cleveland's willingness to publicly rebuke party leaders was unprecedented. He regarded political machines as antithetical to democratic governance, and his actions reflected a deep commitment to reform. Perhaps nowhere was Cleveland's independence more evident than in his handling of controversial legislation. He vetoed measures championed by party leaders when they conflicted with his principles, earning both admiration and enmity. Cleveland articulated his philosophy succinctly: it is not the duty of the president to serve the party, but to serve the people. This assertion, radical for its time, set him apart from presidents who viewed the office primarily as a facilitator of partisan objectives. Party leaders attempted various strategies to rein in Cleveland, ranging from behind the scenes negotiations to public criticism. Yet, the president remained steadfast, believing that concessions for political harmony would erode his mandate. His conduct during the tariff debates, particularly his advocacy for reform over party unity, reinforced his reputation as a leader willing to stand alone. The consequences of Cleveland's battles with party leaders were manifold. His refusal to engage in patronage cost him political capital, leading to intra-party divisions and weakened support during critical legislative battles. This schism was most pronounced during the 1888 election, when factions within the Democratic Party contributed to his defeat. However, Cleveland's legacy endures as an exemplar of political courage, demonstrating that principled leadership can transcend the limitations of partisan allegiance. In sum, the battles Cleveland fought against his own party are indicative of a broader vision for governance. He rejected the notion that presidents should serve as mere instruments of party power. instead charting a path defined by accountability and honesty. Standing alone, Cleveland affirmed the possibility of an independent executive, a lesson as relevant today as it was in the tumultuous era of his presidency. Chapter 13, Defeat Without Defeat, Losing the White House. The episode of Grover Cleveland's defeat in the 1888 presidential election offers a profound lesson in dignity, resilience, and the intricacies of American democracy. Cleveland's loss, though politically significant, was not a defeat in spirit, but rather a passage through which his character and public standing emerged. Strengthened and refined, the election of 1888 unfolded against the backdrop of intense partisan rivalry and economic debate. Cleveland, the incumbent, had staked his presidency on tariff reform, a policy that, while principled and consistent, alienated key constituencies. The Republicans under Benjamin Harrison aggressively countered with promises of protectionism and appeals to industrial interests. The contest quickly became a referendum on economic philosophy, government transparency, and the role of executive leadership in national affairs. Despite the clarity of Cleveland's vision, the electoral landscape was fraught with obstacles. The urban machines of his own party, disgruntled by his refusal to provide patronage, offered only tepid support. The Grand Army of the Republic mobilized against him, branding his fiscal discipline as hostility toward veterans. The Republicans invested heavily in campaign strategy, reportedly engaging in questionable tactics, including inducing votes in key swing states. On election night, Cleveland won the popular vote but lost the electoral tally, a striking anomaly that underscored the complexity of the American system. The manner in which Cleveland handled his defeat set him apart. There were no recriminations, no sulking, and no attempts to challenge the outcome. Instead, Cleveland accepted the results with equanimity, issuing statements that congratulated Harrison and thanked his supporters for their dedication. This poise in the face of loss earned him widespread respect, even among political adversaries. The interregnum between Cleveland's presidencies was a period of introspection and recalibration. Far from fading into obscurity, Cleveland remained a visible and influential voice. He critiqued the extravagances and policy shortcomings of Harrison's administration, but did so with restraint, positioning himself as a guardian of principle rather than a mere opposition figure. This behavior enhanced his reputation for honesty and added to the perception that his defeat was a temporary setback, not a repudiation. Cleveland's defeat, paradoxically, prepared the ground for his return. The Democratic Party, recognizing the absence of his integrity and discipline, called upon him once more in 1892 amid new scandals and dissatisfaction with Republican rule. The unique circumstances of his comeback, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, reflect the enduring appeal of character in American political life. Cleveland's stewardship during defeat, marked by dignity and unwavering adherence to principle, became the foundation for his second presidency. The lessons from Cleveland's loss are manifold. The nature of defeat is not measured solely by the outcome of elections, but by one's response to adversity. Cleveland demonstrated that integrity need not yield to partisanship or personal ambition. Instead, it can become a source of inspiration, fostering renewed engagement and leadership. His experience illustrates how defeat without defeat is possible, how loss can serve as a crucible from which strength and purpose arise. Chapter 14, The Return, Winning a Second Non-Consecutive Term. Grover Cleveland's return to the presidency stands as one of the most remarkable episodes in American political history. In 1892, for years after his defeat, Cleveland reclaimed the White House, becoming the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. This unique achievement was not merely a matter of electoral strategy, but a testament to his enduring reputation for honesty, civic virtue, principled leadership. The campaign that marked Cleveland's return was shaped by the shifting currents of public dissatisfaction. The Harrison administration, beset by accusations of corruption and unpopular policies, most notably the McKinley Tariff, invited widespread disillusionment among both Republican and Democratic ranks. Cleveland, during his exile, had maintained a steady public presence, articulating critiques rooted in principle rather than mere opposition. His steadfastness made him an attractive choice. For a party desperate for credibility and stability, Cleveland's nomination by the Democratic Party was inevitable, yet not without drama. Factions opposed to his civil service reforms and his stance on the monetary issue sought alternative candidates, but Cleveland's reputation could not be eclipsed. The convention in Chicago crystallized around the theme of reform, integrity, and national interest. His selection signaled both a return to core democratic values and a yearning for a leader, unbowed by partisan pressures. The general election saw Cleveland face off against Harrison once again. Unlike previous campaigns, Cleveland's messages were focused and direct, emphasizing the necessity of tariff reform, opposition to unnecessary government spending, and promises of economic stability. Attacks by opponents who questioned his resolve and raised concerns about his policies were met with clarity and calm. Cleveland's campaign, run with the support of his skilled wife, Frances, and a broad coalition of reformers, garnered widespread enthusiasm. Victory in the election was decisive in both popular and electoral terms. Cleveland's return was viewed as a vindication, an endorsement of his approach to public service, and a rebuke to the divisive practices of the preceding administration. Yet, the challenges confronting his second presidency were formidable. The nation was beset by issues of currency, growing labor unrest, and rising expectations from diverse constituencies. Cleveland's second term was marked by immediate crises, the Panic of 1893 being among the greatest. His responses were shaped by the same principles that guided his earlier years: fiscal discipline, honesty, and a commitment to the Constitution. While he faced new adversities and opposition, Cleveland's approach reflected continuity, stability, and a refusal to compromise on matters of principle. His unique status as a two-time, non-consecutive president reinforced the perception of Cleveland as a leader apart. The symbolism of his return carried powerful implications for the office itself, demonstrating that integrity, when allied with public support, could overcome setbacks and even historical precedent. Cleveland's presidency, across both terms, thus remains a beacon for those who value character over convenience. The narrative of Cleveland's return echoes through the annals of democracy. It is a lesson in resilience, the cyclical nature of public opinion, and the ultimate triumph of honesty. Cleveland's journey, marked by defeat and renewal, offers a roadmap for political life grounded in principle, challenging leaders to uphold the public trust despite adversity or personal cost. Chapter 15: Panic of 1893, Crisis and Controversy. The Panic of 1893 was one of the most severe economic crises in American history, casting a shadow over Cleveland's second term and testing the limits of presidential authority and vision. The onset of the Depression was sudden and relentless, underscoring both the volatility of a rapidly industrializing economy and the enduring challenges of governance during periods of upheaval. The roots of the panic were manifold. Excessive railroad expansion, speculative investments, and unsound banking practices combined to create a fragile financial edifice. The collapse of two major railroads triggered a domino effect, resulting in widespread bank failures, business bankruptcies, and skyrocketing unemployment. The panic gripped cities and towns alike, with hundreds of thousands thrown out of work and entire communities plunged into hardship. Cleveland, newly returned to office, confronted the crisis with characteristic sobriety and determination. He believed that the underlying problem was the instability caused by the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, a law requiring the government to buy large quantities of silver, thereby inflating the currency and undermining confidence in gold-backed dollars. Cleveland pressed Congress to repeal the act, arguing that sound money was essential for recovery. His stance deepened divisions within the Democratic Party, many of whom advocated for inflationary policies as relief for indebted farmers and workers. The repeal was acrimonious and fraught with political peril. Cleveland's advocacy was unwavering. He viewed partial measures as dangerous, insisting that adherence to the gold standard was vital for national credibility. The debates in Congress echoed beyond the chamber walls, with financial markets and everyday citizens anxiously awaiting the outcome. The passage of repeal legislation was narrow and contentious, exacerbating intra-party strife but stabilizing currency in the long term. Crisis management extended beyond fiscal policy. Cleveland resisted calls for direct federal intervention, believing that the government should provide stability without usurping market functions. Relief efforts were fragmented, with private charities and local governments carrying the burden. The president's reluctance to embrace large-scale government aid was consistent with his philosophy, but led to accusations of inaction or indifference. Public sentiment during the panic was volatile and unforgiving. Labor strikes, political protests, and the emergence of radical movements reflected widespread discontent. Cleveland's responses, though principled, were often criticized as insufficient, particularly his use of federal troops to quell the Pullman strike, which many viewed as excessive. The controversy surrounding these actions highlighted the tensions between order and justice, government power and individual rights. International repercussions followed. As investors scrutinized the stability of American markets, Cleveland's diplomacy, rooted in honesty and restraint, reassured European counterparts but did little to stanch domestic unrest. The magnitude of the crisis and the limits of presidential authority became painfully clear. Despite the challenges, Cleveland's handling of the panic reflected his commitment to fiscal discipline, constitutional government, and the public trust. While his measures were contentious, they laid the groundwork for future reforms and underscored the importance of principled leadership in times of crisis. The Panic of 1893 is thus both a cautionary tale and a demonstration of Cleveland's character, a period in which honesty and fortitude confronted the storm of controversy and hardship. Chapter 16: Labor Unrest and Federal Power. The late 19th century in America was an era marked by rapid industrialization, burgeoning population centers, and an increasing tension between the interests of labor and capital. Grover Cleveland entered his presidency as these forces collided, presenting him with one of the most defining challenges: how to address labor unrest without compromising constitutional values or escalating conflict. Cleveland's approach was shaped by a deep respect for federal authority and a belief in limited government intervention. As labor strikes became more frequent and widespread, including the notable Pullman strike of 1894, he faced mounting pressure from both sides. Workers demanded fair wages, reasonable hours, and humane working conditions, while business leaders insisted on maintaining operational control and economic stability. In this volatile environment, Cleveland's commitment to law and order was put to the ultimate test. His response to the Pullman strike is particularly illustrative of his philosophy. The strike had paralyzed railroad traffic across the Midwest, threatening commerce and public safety. Cleveland weighed the constitutional powers vested in the executive against the rights of workers to organize and protest. Ultimately, he authorized the deployment of federal troops, a decision he justified by citing the need to maintain public order and ensure the delivery of both federal responsibilities. Cleveland's intervention was met with fierce criticism. Labor leaders accused him of siding with big business, while others argued that his actions set a dangerous precedent for federal interference. Cleveland, ever steadfast, asserted that adherence to the law must override ephemeral sentiments or political convenience. In his communication with Congress, he stated, "If the law is not respected, society falls into chaos and democracy itself is endangered." The aftermath of the strike was complex. It led to the arrest of key labor leaders, including Eugene V. Debs, and a temporary restoration of order. But it also fueled animosity among workers and exposed the limitations of the government's response. Cleveland's decision underscored the inherent tension between maintaining civil order and respecting the rights of organized labor. To Cleveland, the role of the president was not to arbitrate the demands of the marketplace, but to ensure the constitutionality of government action. His steadfastness in the face of criticism reinforced his reputation for honesty and principle. Even as it incurred political costs, he maintained that the government's obligation was to the broader public. not to factions or interests, and asserted, "The Union must be preserved by respecting the laws that bind us together." This chapter examines the nuances of Cleveland's decisions, his correspondence with advisors, and the societal repercussions of his actions. Through archival materials and first-hand accounts, readers gain a detailed understanding of how Cleveland navigated the minefield of labor relations, balancing empathy and enforcement. His legacy in this arena is a template for principled leadership under pressure, demonstrating the virtues and limitations of honest governance in times of crisis. Chapter 17, Foreign Policy with Restraint and Resolve. Grover Cleveland's presidency coincided with an era when American foreign policy was poised for transformation. Though expansionist sentiment permeated political discourse, Cleveland confronted international affairs with a sense of restraint and an ethos grounded in national self-interest and justice. His foreign policy decisions, marked by caution and measured resolve, distinguished him from many contemporaries who sought to project power through imperial adventures. The first major foreign challenge of Cleveland's presidency was the situation in Hawaii. As American business interests eyed the islands, the movement for annexation grew stronger. Cleveland, unwavering in his respect for sovereignty, was deeply troubled by the circumstances surrounding the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. He ordered a thorough investigation, concluding that Queen Liliuokalani had been deposed illegally by American residents and commercial interests. Unwilling to sanction what he viewed as an act of injustice, Cleveland recommended the restoration of the Queen, a move that met resistance from Congress and business leaders. Cleveland's principled stance in Hawaii underscored his commitment to ethical foreign relations. He believed that American values were best upheld through the respect of other nations' autonomy, not through forceful intervention or annexation. In his words, "Our greatness is born not by conquest, but by honor." Though ultimately unsuccessful in reversing the annexation effort, Cleveland's intervention shaped the broader discourse on America's role in international affairs. Another episode exemplifying Cleveland's foreign policy philosophy was the Venezuelan crisis of 1895. A border dispute between British Guiana and Venezuela threatened regional stability and invoked questions of American involvement. Invoking the Monroe Doctrine, Cleveland insisted on arbitration and diplomatic resolution over military engagement. His administration negotiated tirelessly, culminating in a peaceful settlement recognized as a triumph for American diplomacy. Cleveland's hesitance to embroil the United States in foreign conflicts reflected a broader vision for the country's place on the world stage. He believed that the powers afforded to the executive branch in foreign affairs must be exercised judiciously, lest the nation sacrifice its ideals for transient gain. His tenure is marked not by territorial expansion or colonial ambition, but by a refusal to compromise principles in the face of geopolitical temptations. This chapter explores the intricacies of Cleveland's foreign policy. Through a detailed analysis of official correspondence, diplomatic negotiations, and cabinet meetings, scholars will find a leader whose resolve was paired with careful restraint, a combination rare in the history of American diplomacy. Cleveland's example, as detailed here, invites reflection on the enduring tension between national interest and moral obligation, laying the foundation for principled engagement in a rapidly changing world. Chapter 18, The Cost of Principle, Popularity versus Conviction. Throughout his tenure, Grover Cleveland championed an unwavering adherence to principle, often at the expense of personal and political popularity. His presidency was a crucible where conviction was tested by public opinion, party politics, and the shifting tides of national sentiment. Cleveland's resolve to act according to his beliefs, rather than yield to prevailing trends, illuminated the often precarious position of honest leadership in a democracy. Key among his controversial decisions was his opposition to the manipulation of the currency through the free coinage of silver. In the late 1800s, populist movements advocated for policies that would inflate the nation's money supply, easing debt burdens but risking economic instability. Cleveland, committed to sound finance, resolutely vetoed measures supporting silver coinage. He warned that such policies, though temporarily popular, would undermine the nation's economic integrity and international standing. His stance stirred fierce backlash. Many in his own Democratic Party, particularly those representing agrarian interests, accused him of betrayal. Cleveland, however, remained unfazed, declaring, "I would rather lose office on principle than win it through deception." His vetoes and public addresses set him apart from contemporaries more willing to court favor at the expense of stability and honesty. This episode typifies the broader theme of Cleveland's legacy, the cost of maintaining conviction amidst adversity. Similarly, Cleveland's approach to tariffs, the taxes levied on imported goods, reflected his philosophy of government for the greater good, not just sectional interests. While tariffs were widely popular among industrial constituencies, Cleveland believed that their proliferation led to inefficiency and unfair burdens on consumers. He challenged Congress to revise the system, delivering an unprecedented State of the Union address focused solely on tariff reform. The speech, honest and unvarnished, encapsulated Cleveland's willingness to confront entrenched interests, even as it risked alienation and electoral defeat. Cleveland's commitment to principle was not only a political stance, but a deeply personal ethos. He lived simply, eschewing the trappings of office and maintaining a rigorous schedule grounded in duty. His letters show a man who agonized over decisions, measured not just by their impact on the nation, but by their alignment with his inner convictions. This chapter unpacks the sacrifices Cleveland made in pursuit of honesty, tracing his most controversial moments and analyzing their implications for his legacy. Through a comprehensive examination of speeches, correspondence, and historical analysis, readers understand that Cleveland's popularity waxed and waned, but his devotion to truth remained steadfast. The narrative serves as a reflection on the enduring challenge for leaders to navigate the precarious balance between the demands of the public and the imperatives of conscience. Chapter 19, Retirement and Reflection, the Elder Statesman. The culmination of Grover Cleveland's presidency did not mark the end of his influence on American society. Instead, it ushered in an era of reflection, mentorship, and continued civic engagement. As Cleveland retired from public office, he became an elder statesman, revered for his honesty and wisdom, and admired for his ability to transcend partisanship and serve as a moral compass to the nation. In his post-presidential years, Cleveland withdrew to the tranquil town of Princeton, New Jersey. Here, he embraced a quieter life, preferring contemplation and reading to the tumult of political life. Yet, he remained engaged with the pressing issues of the day, frequently writing editorials and letters to national leaders and legislators. His counsel was sought by both allies and adversaries, who recognized that Cleveland's insights were shaped by years of principled leadership. Cleveland's role as mentor was particularly significant. He served as a trustee and counselor at Princeton University, guiding young minds and imparting lessons on integrity and public service. His speeches at academic and civic functions emphasized the importance of honesty, patience, and humility. He reminded students and citizens alike that leadership, at its best, demands a commitment to selflessness and enduring values, even as the political landscape changed. Cleveland remained vocal on matters he deemed essential. He offered measured critiques of successive administrations, advocated for sound monetary policy, and discouraged what he saw as the increasing polarization of public life. His letters to the editors and public figures reveal a man who understood the complex needs of the nation, but refused to be swayed by fleeting passions or partisan advantage. Cleveland's reflections, chronicled in this chapter, provide invaluable insights into the psychology and ethos of an honest leader. Through a collection of personal writings and reminiscences, readers encounter a man more preoccupied with the legacy of service than with personal acclaim. In his twilight years, Cleveland's humility shone brightest. He accepted the limitations of political life, recognized the shifting tides of history, and embraced the serenity of retirement. Yet, the imprint of his leadership remained vibrant, inspiring successive generations to uphold the standards of public service. In examining Cleveland's retirement, this chapter reveals the enduring value of reflection, mentorship, and moral authority in shaping a nation. Chapter 20, Legacy of Honesty, America's Uncompromising President. Grover Cleveland's legacy is indelibly marked by his reputation as one of America's most honest and uncompromising presidents. The consequences of his principled leadership reverberated far beyond his own era, influencing the standards of governance, public discourse, and the expectations of presidential conduct. Cleveland's embodiment of integrity became a pillar against which other leaders would be measured. His commitment to honest government laid the foundation for reform in areas such as civil service, where Cleveland insisted on merit over patronage. He championed the Pendleton Act, enforcing the separation of merit-based appointments from political favor, and thereby transforming the bureaucracy into a more professional and efficient instrument of governance. These reforms decreased corruption, increased public trust, and reshaped the nation's administrative ethos. Cleveland's legacy further extended to the role of the presidency. As a guardian of constitutional principles, his refusal to pander to special interests or compromise on essential values set a new standard for executive responsibility. Unlike presidents who wielded power as a tool for personal or party gain, Cleveland presented a model of responsibility, one grounded in a desire to preserve the republic for generations. His speeches and writings championed the notion that the presidency must remain a bulwark against the encroachments of factionalism and dishonesty. Moreover, Cleveland's administration influenced the nation's approach to foreign and domestic issues with an emphasis on restraint, ethical conduct, and transparency. He demonstrated that recognition of limits in power, policy, and ambition is itself an act of wisdom. By resisting the temptations of expansionism and political pandering, he ensured that the nation's ethos remained true to its foundational beliefs. Cleveland's life and career remind us that the true measure of a leader lies not in temporary victories, but in the enduring impact of integrity. The narrative explored in this chapter draws on historical assessments, contemporary reflections, and comparisons with other administrations, presenting Cleveland's legacy as a guiding star for those who aspire to honest public service. The chapter concludes with a discussion on the modern relevance of Cleveland's values, suggesting that the lessons of his presidency remain vital in a time when public trust in institutions is waning. Cleveland's honesty, humility, and stewardship offer a template for all who wish to serve, and his uncompromising commitment to principle provides an enduring standard for the nation.